Silas lived a life as still as the tall pines surrounding his cabin. He woke with the sun, hunted for his meals, and mended his own clothes. The rhythm of his days was simple. Chop wood, fetch water, read by the fire, sleep. He was a man of few words, content in his solitude. He didn't dislike people, he just preferred the company of the forest. Years had passed since he last ventured into town, finding everything he needed right here in the wilderness. His cabin, built from sturdy logs he'd felled himself, was small but strong, a single room with a loft for sleeping. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. A crackling fire in the hearth provided warmth and light, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Silas owned a well-worn rifle, a trusty axe, and a stack of books he'd collected over the years, treasures in his quiet world. He knew the forest like the back of his hand, understanding the language of the birds and the rustling of leaves. He was a skilled tracker, a patient hunter, and a self-sufficient man. He needed no one, or so he thought. His days were peaceful, predictable, and perfectly suited to his solitary nature. He valued the quiet, the stillness, the absence of interruption. Little did he know, the coming winter would bring a change so profound it would shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. The first snow fell early that year, a heavy blanket that muffled the sounds of the forest. Silas, prepared as always, had stocked up on firewood and supplies. He settled in for a long, quiet winter, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But the wind carried more than just snow. It carried whispers of tragedy. One bitter morning, a rider arrived at Silas's cabin, his face etched with worry. The man, a fur trapper named Jed, brought news of a wagon train caught in a blizzard high in the mountains. Many had perished, including the husband of a woman named Sarah. She and her 3 young children had survived, but were stranded and in desperate need of shelter. "They're holed up in a broken-down wagon, Silas," Jed said, his voice hoarse. "It's not fit for animals, let alone a woman and her young uns. I'd take 'em myself, but my cabin's too small." Silas hesitated. The thought of sharing his space, his solitude with a family, especially children, filled him with unease. His peaceful life would be shattered. But looking into Jed's pleading eyes, he saw the desperation of the situation. He knew he couldn't turn his back on them. "I have room," Silas said finally, his voice barely a whisper. Jed's face lit up with relief. "Thank you, Silas. You're a good man. I'll guide them here as soon as the snow lets up a bit." He paused, then added, "They're all they have left, Silas. Be kind to them." With that, Jed turned his horse and disappeared back into the swirling snow, leaving Silas alone with the weight of his decision. His quiet winter was about to become very, very loud. Silas spent the next few days preparing for their arrival, a flurry of activity disrupting his usual calm. He cleared a space near the fire for Sarah and the baby, stacking extra blankets and furs to create a makeshift bed. He reinforced the roof, knowing the cabin would need to withstand the weight of the winter snows and the added warmth of more bodies inside. He thought about the children, trying to imagine what they must be going through. He knew little about kids. Jed had mentioned their ages. A baby still in arms, a toddler barely able to walk, and a little girl maybe 7 years old. He rummaged through his few possessions, finding a wooden toy he'd carved years ago, a simple horse on wheels. It was dusty and worn, but maybe it would bring a smile to the little girl's face. The day they arrived was bleak and gray. Silas stood on his porch, watching as Jed led a small, weary group through the snow. Sarah was thin and pale, her face etched with grief. She carried the baby wrapped tightly in a blanket, while the little girl clung to her skirt, her eyes wide with fear. The toddler stumbled along, his small hands reaching for his mother. Silas stepped forward, his heart aching at the sight of their suffering. "Welcome," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "Come in, get warm." He ushered them inside, the small cabin suddenly feeling very crowded. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the smell of wet wool and something else, something sweet and innocent, the smell of children. Silas knew in that moment that his life would never be the same. The quiet frontiersman had opened his door, and his heart to a family in need. The first few weeks were a challenge. Silas's small cabin, once a sanctuary of quiet, was now filled with the sounds of crying, laughter, and constant movement. The baby, Samuel, needed constant attention. Sarah was exhausted and grieving, and the two older children, Emily and Thomas, were restless and confused. The cramped quarters made everything difficult. Silas, used to having the entire cabin to himself, found it hard to adjust to sharing his space. Sarah tried her best to keep the children quiet and out of his way, but it was impossible. Thomas, the toddler, was drawn to Silas's tools, constantly reaching for the axe or the knife. Emily, the 7-year-old, was shy and withdrawn, spending most of her time huddled near her mother. Silas struggled with the noise and the chaos. He missed his quiet evenings by the fire, his solitary meals, his undisturbed sleep. He didn't know how to comfort a crying baby or entertain a restless child. He felt awkward and out of place in his own home. Sarah, sensing his discomfort, tried to minimize the burden on him. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and kept the children as quiet as possible. But she was also dealing with her own grief and exhaustion. She missed her husband terribly and worried about her children's future. The silence between Silas and Sarah was thick with unspoken tension. They were two strangers, thrown together by circumstance, struggling to navigate a difficult situation. It seemed impossible that they could ever find common ground, let alone form a family. The initial awkwardness threatened to overwhelm them all, turning the small cabin into a pressure cooker of unspoken emotions. Silas began to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. One afternoon, Emily found the wooden horse Silas had set aside. She picked it up, her eyes widening slightly, but one of the wheels was broken, dangling uselessly. She brought it to Sarah, her lower lip trembling. "Mama, it's broken," she whispered. Sarah, overwhelmed with chores and exhaustion, sighed. "I'll fix it later, honey," she said, not really looking at the toy. Emily, disappointed, wandered over to Silas, who was sitting by the fire, mending a tear in his coat. She held out the horse to him, her eyes pleading. Silas looked at the broken toy, then at Emily's sad face. He hesitated, then took the horse from her. He examined the broken wheel, his brow furrowed in concentration. He rummaged through his toolbox, finding a small piece of wood and some glue. With his large, calloused hands, he carefully began to repair the toy. Emily watched him intently, her eyes fixed on his every move. Sarah, noticing the quiet, looked over and saw Silas working on the horse. She was surprised. She hadn't expected him to bother. As Silas worked, he didn't speak, but his actions spoke volumes. He was showing Emily and Sarah that he cared. After a while, he carefully glued the piece of wood to the broken wheel, holding it firmly in place until the glue dried. He then tested the wheel, making sure it turned smoothly. Finally, he handed the horse back to Emily. "There you go," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "Good as new." Emily took the horse, her face lighting up with a smile. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the toy tightly. She ran off to play, the repaired horse bumping happily across the floor. In that small act of kindness, something shifted in the cabin. The ice began to thaw, and a tiny seed of connection was planted. Silas hadn't just fixed a toy, he'd started to mend a broken heart. As winter deepened, Silas found himself drawn into the rhythm of the family. He started helping Sarah with small tasks, fetching water, and chopping wood, easing her burden. He even began to interact with the children more, teaching Emily how to identify animal tracks in the snow and showing Thomas how to stack firewood. One day, Silas took Emily with him to check his traps. He showed her how to carefully approach the traps, how to identify the different animals that frequented the area, and how to reset the traps without harming them. Emily, wide-eyed with wonder, listened intently, absorbing every word he said. Thomas, too young to go on such excursions, would often sit by Silas's side as he worked, watching him with fascination. Silas, in turn, would tell him stories about the forest, about the animals that lived there, and about the importance of respecting nature. He even started helping Sarah with Samuel, the baby. He learned how to hold him, how to soothe him when he cried, and how to change his diaper, albeit clumsily. He discovered a surprising gentleness within himself, a tenderness he never knew he possessed. The children, in turn, began to see Silas not as a grumpy stranger, but as a kind and capable protector. They started calling him Uncle Silas, a term that warmed his heart, even though he pretended to disapprove. Sarah watched this transformation with a growing sense of gratitude and hope. Silas was slowly becoming part of their family, filling a void left by their loss. The cabin, once filled with tension, was now filled with a sense of belonging, a feeling of love that transcended their shared tragedy. Silas was teaching them how to survive, but they were teaching him how to live. Sarah watched Silas with a mixture of awe and gratitude. She saw how the children gravitated towards him, how their faces lit up whenever he spoke to them. She noticed how he anticipated their needs, offering a helping hand before she even asked. He was becoming more than just a benefactor. He was becoming a father figure to her children. She also saw the change in Silas himself. The gruff, solitary frontiersman was slowly disappearing, replaced by a kinder, more compassionate man. He smiled more often, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He seemed lighter, happier, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Sarah looked at Silas and said, "Thank you, Silas, for everything. You've given us a home when we had nowhere else to go." Silas shrugged, his cheeks flushing slightly. "You're welcome," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "No, it's more than that," Sarah insisted. "You've given my children a sense of security, a sense of hope. You've shown them kindness and love when they needed it most. I don't know how to repay you." Silas finally looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. "You don't have to repay me, Sarah," he said softly. "Your children, they've brought something into my life I never knew was missing. They've made this cabin a home." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine affection he felt for her children. She realized that Silas wasn't just helping them out of pity. He genuinely cared for them, and she, in turn, was starting to care for him not just as a friend, but as something more. The lines were blurring, the boundaries shifting. The quiet frontiersman and the widowed mother were slowly, tentatively, finding their way to each other. Just when they were beginning to settle into a comfortable routine, a fierce blizzard descended upon them, the worst Silas had seen in years. The wind howled relentlessly, shaking the cabin to its foundations. Snow piled up against the walls, blocking out the light and trapping them inside. The fire became their lifeline, providing warmth and a small measure of comfort against the raging storm. Silas worked tirelessly to keep it burning, venturing out into the blizzard to gather more wood, his face red and raw from the biting wind. Sarah did her best to keep the children calm, reading them stories and singing songs to distract them from the storm. But even she couldn't hide her fear. The blizzard showed no signs of letting up, and their supplies were dwindling. One night, the wind intensified, ripping a section of the roof loose. Snow poured into the cabin, drenching everything and threatening to extinguish the fire. Silas and Sarah worked frantically to repair the roof, battling the wind and the cold, their hands numb and aching. Emily and Thomas, sensing the danger, huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Samuel, the baby, cried incessantly, adding to the chaos. Silas, realizing the severity of the situation, pulled Sarah aside. "We need to reinforce the roof," he said, his voice grim. "It's the only way to keep us safe." Sarah nodded, her face pale with determination. "What can I do?" "Help me hold the blankets against the opening," Silas said. "It won't be easy, but we have to try." Together, they braved the storm, working side by side to secure the roof. The wind and snow battered them relentlessly, but they persevered, driven by their determination to protect the children. In that moment of crisis, their bond deepened, forged in the crucible of shared danger. They were no longer just strangers sharing a cabin. They were a family, fighting for their survival. The blizzard raged for 3 days, testing their resilience to the limit. Food was scarce, the fire was dwindling, and the cold was relentless. But Silas and Sarah refused to give up, driven by their love for the children. They huddled together for warmth, sharing stories and memories to keep their spirits up. During the brief lulls in the storm, Silas would venture out to check his traps, hoping to find some game to feed them. One day, he returned with a rabbit, his face beaming with pride. It wasn't much, but it was enough to provide them with a meager meal and a renewed sense of hope. Sarah, watching Silas as he skinned and cooked the rabbit, felt a wave of affection wash over her. She admired his strength, his courage, and his unwavering determination to protect them. She realized that she had come to rely on him, not just for shelter, but for emotional support and companionship. As they ate the rabbit stew, sharing it equally among them, Sarah looked at Silas and saw not just a kind benefactor, but a man she could love. She saw a man who was strong and gentle, capable and compassionate, a man who had opened his heart to her and her children. The blizzard finally subsided on the 4th day, leaving behind a landscape of pristine white. The sun emerged from behind the clouds, casting a golden glow on the snow-covered cabin. As Silas and Sarah stood outside, surveying the damage, their eyes met, and they shared a knowing smile. They had survived the storm not just physically but emotionally. The blizzard had tested their limits and strengthened their bond, solidifying their connection and paving the way for a future together. They had faced the worst, and they had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more in love than ever before. Spring eventually arrived, painting the landscape with vibrant colors. The snow melted, the birds returned, and the forest came alive with new growth. As the days grew longer and warmer, Sarah began to think about the future. She knew she couldn't stay with Silas forever. She needed to find a way to support herself and her children, to build a new life for them. She started making plans to move on, perhaps to a nearby town where she could find work as a seamstress or a cook. She felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving Silas, but she knew it was the right thing to do. She couldn't impose on him forever. She began packing their belongings, sorting through their clothes and gathering their few possessions. The children, sensing the change, became quiet and withdrawn. Emily, especially, clung to Silas, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. One evening, as Sarah was mending a tear in Emily's dress, Emily looked up at her and said, "Mama, are we going to leave Uncle Silas?" Sarah's heart ached at the question. "Yes, honey," she said softly. "We can't stay here forever. We need to find a place of our own." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't want to leave Uncle Silas," she said, her voice trembling. "He's our family." Sarah hugged Emily tightly, her own eyes welling up with tears. She knew that Emily was right. Silas had become their family. But she also knew that she couldn't let her feelings for him cloud her judgment. She had to do what was best for her children, even if it meant leaving Silas behind. She felt an immense guilt, knowing she was about to break Silas's heart, and potentially her own. The thought of leaving the safety and security of the cabin, and Silas's protective presence, filled her with dread. But the practicalities of life weighed heavily on her mind. Silas noticed Sarah's preparations, the subtle shift in her demeanor. He saw her packing, the way she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. He knew what she was planning, and a cold dread settled in his stomach. He didn't want them to leave. He had grown accustomed to the noise, the chaos, the constant presence of Sarah and the children. They had filled his life with a warmth and a purpose he never knew he craved. He couldn't imagine going back to his solitary existence. He tried to ignore his feelings, to convince himself that it was for the best. Sarah needed to build a life for her children, and he couldn't stand in her way. But the thought of losing them, of returning to his empty cabin, filled him with despair. He wanted to tell her how he felt, to beg her to stay, but he couldn't find the words. He was a man of few words, and expressing his emotions was never easy for him. He struggled with the fear of rejection, the fear of disrupting her plans, the fear of ruining everything. He watched her from a distance, his heart aching with unspoken longing. He saw her teaching Emily how to sew, helping Thomas build a birdhouse, and cradling Samuel in her arms. He admired her strength, her resilience, her unwavering love for her children. He knew that he loved her, and he loved her children. They had become his family, his world. But he was afraid to say it, afraid to risk everything. He remained silent, trapped in his own quiet world, watching as the woman he loved prepared to leave him behind. The spring that had brought new life to the forest threatened to take away the only life he truly valued. The day before Sarah planned to leave, Emily approached Silas with tears in her eyes. "Uncle Silas," she said, her voice small and trembling. "Mama says we have to go away." Silas knelt down, his heart aching at the sight of her distress. "I know, Emily," he said softly. "But I don't want to go," she cried. "I want to stay here with you. You're our family." Thomas, overhearing the conversation, ran over and clung to Silas's leg. "Don't go, Mama. Don't go," he pleaded. Sarah, watching from the porch, felt her resolve crumble. The children's distress was too much to bear. She knew she had to talk to Silas, to explain her decision, to say goodbye. She walked over to them, her face etched with sadness. "Children, please," she said gently. "Let me talk to Uncle Silas." Emily and Thomas reluctantly moved away, their eyes fixed on Silas, pleading with him to do something. Sarah looked at Silas, her heart pounding in her chest. "Silas," she began, her voice trembling. "I know this is difficult, but I have to do what's best for my children. I need to find a way to support them, to build a stable life for them." Silas looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "And you think you can't do that here?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I don't know if I can impose on you forever. I don't know if—" Before she could finish her sentence, Emily interrupted. "Mama," she cried, "please, can't we just stay? Please." She looked at Silas with desperate eyes. "Tell her, Uncle Silas. Tell her we want to stay." The weight of the children's pleas, combined with Sarah's own conflicted feelings, created an unbearable tension in the air. The decision that would shape their future hung precariously in the balance. Silas looked at Sarah, then at Emily and Thomas, their faces pleading, their eyes filled with tears. He saw the love in their eyes, the longing for a place to belong. He knew that he couldn't remain silent any longer. He had to speak his heart, to risk everything for the chance of a future with them. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly as he finally broke his silence. "Sarah," he said, his gaze fixed on hers, "I know I'm not good with words, but I need you to know that you and the children, you've changed my life." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "Before you came, my life was empty, solitary. I had everything I needed, but nothing I wanted. You brought laughter, warmth, and love into this cabin. You showed me what it means to be a family." He looked at Emily and Thomas, his eyes filled with affection. "These children, they've become my family. I love them as if they were my own. And you, Sarah, I've fallen in love with you." He took another deep breath, his cheeks flushing slightly. "I know I'm not the man you expected, but I promise you, I will do everything in my power to provide for you and the children, to protect you, to love you for the rest of my life. Please, Sarah, don't leave. Stay here with me. Let us be a family." He waited, his heart pounding in his chest, his future hanging in the balance. The only sound was the gentle breeze rustling through the trees and the soft sobs of the children, their hopes and dreams resting on Sarah's decision. The weight of his unspoken feelings, finally released, filled the small clearing with an undeniable force, a testament to the transformative power of love. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she listened to Silas's heartfelt confession. She had suspected his feelings, but hearing him say the words aloud, hearing him express his love for her and her children, filled her with a joy she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at the children, their faces lit up with hope, their eyes fixed on her, waiting for her answer. She knew that she couldn't disappoint them. She also knew that she couldn't deny her own feelings any longer. She took a step towards Silas, her hand reaching out to touch his face. "Silas," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I love you too." A wave of relief washed over Silas's face, his eyes shining with happiness. He reached out and took her hand, holding it tightly in his. "And the children?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah smiled, her heart overflowing with love. "They love you too," she said. "You've become their father, their protector, their everything." She looked at Emily and Thomas, their faces beaming with joy. "We're staying," she announced, her voice filled with certainty. "We're staying here with Silas. We're going to be a family." Emily and Thomas cheered, running to embrace Silas and Sarah. Samuel, the baby, gurgled happily, sensing the joy and love that filled the air. In that moment, the cabin felt warmer, brighter, more full of love than ever before. The quiet frontiersman, who had once lived a solitary life, had found his family, his purpose, his entire world. The widow and her 3 children, who had lost everything, had found a home, a haven, and a love that would last a lifetime. The long winter had finally given way to a beautiful spring, a new beginning for them all. The following years were filled with joy, laughter, and the everyday challenges of raising a family. Silas, no longer the solitary frontiersman, embraced his role as a father and husband. He taught the children how to hunt and fish, how to build a fire, and how to respect the wilderness. He helped Emily with her lessons, listened to Thomas's endless stories, and cradled Samuel in his arms, singing him lullabies in his gruff voice. Sarah, in turn, created a warm and loving home, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of children's laughter. She planted a garden, filled with colorful flowers and vegetables, bringing beauty and sustenance to their lives. She sewed clothes for the children, mended Silas's shirts, and kept the cabin clean and organized. They faced hardships together, enduring harsh winters, occasional droughts, and the ever-present challenges of frontier life. But they always supported each other, drawing strength from their love and their commitment to their family. Silas learned to be more open, more expressive, sharing his thoughts and feelings with Sarah. He learned to listen, to empathize, to understand her needs and her dreams. Sarah, in turn, helped him to overcome his fears, to embrace his emotions, and to become the man he was always meant to be. The children thrived under their loving care, growing into strong, kind, and compassionate individuals. They learned the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the power of love. They knew that they were lucky to have Silas as their father, a man who had taken them in when they had nowhere else to go, a man who had given them a home, a family, and a future. Their lives were a testament to the transformative power of love, proving that even in the most unexpected circumstances, families can be created and hearts can be healed. Years later, Silas and Sarah sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Emily and Thomas were grown, married, and had families of their own. Samuel, now a young man, was helping Silas tend to the garden. The cabin, once a small and solitary dwelling, had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. It was filled with the sounds of laughter, the scent of home-cooked meals, and the warmth of love. Silas looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with gratitude. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness," he said softly. "You and the children, you've given me everything." Sarah smiled, her heart overflowing with love. "We've been lucky to have you, Silas," she said. "You've been the best husband and father we could have ever asked for." They sat in silence for a moment, watching their grandchildren play, their hearts filled with contentment. They had faced hardships, overcome challenges, and built a life filled with love and joy. Their story was a testament to the power of kindness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative power of love. It was a story about a quiet frontiersman who had opened his door and his heart to a family in need, never knowing that they would become his entire world. It was a story about a widow and her 3 children who had found a home, a haven, and a love that would last a lifetime. And it was a story that proved that love can be found in the most unexpected places, transforming lives and creating families in the most extraordinary ways. The quiet frontiersman had taken in a widow and her 3 children, and in doing so, he had found his own happiness, his own purpose, his own forever family.